This was my favorite place growing up. It's the pine woods in Louisiana. And there were a lot of things there you could climb on, and you could splash in, you could scuff your knees on, you could poke a stick at. And there were all kinds of crazy critters in there too, like the singing cicadas and the roly-polies, both of which I used to poke with a stick, right? We had copperheads, which you might be able to see here, or maybe not. And my sister Debbie can vouch, you do not want to poke this with a stick. We also had these in Icon, Louisiana, and you don't want to get anywhere near one of those with or without a stick. But this isn't about sticks, it's actually about my love for the woods. I've always just really felt at home in the woods, especially growing up in Louisiana. And you see this is a magnolia tree hung with that kind of iconic southern Spanish moss. And I'll take any excuse for a walk in the woods, any excuse at all, especially if there's an opportunity to be inspired by something in those woods, like this burdock plant, which is cool to look at, but I think the coolest thing about it is that these are the seed pods or burrs of the burdock plant, and if you look at them really closely, you'll find they have these tiny hooks. And the function of those hooks is that they catch on to animals passing by that'll brush up against the plant. And they'll basically hitch a ride with that animal to wherever it goes. And what that does is it helps the plant spread its seed and propagate the species. So there was a guy named George de Mestral, had come back from a walk in the woods with his dog, had to pluck a lot of these little tiny things off of his clothes and off his dog, and he looked at one really closely, saw those hooks, happened to be an engineer, and it inspired him to create the hook and loop fastener. Now, in his native language of French, he combined two words for velvet and hook, or velour and crochet, to come up with what we now know as Velcro. Velcro is, I think, the classic example of biomimicry. Biomimicry is what we call the conscious emulation, meaning conscious with intent to mimic nature's forms, such as those hooks, its strategies, how it processes things, like how, let's say, a firefly can chemically make light, and also its systems of how a whole bunch of different things can interrelate. Here you see a system of sorts. This is pine needles and leaves on the forest floor, and it's systems like these that have this sort of organized chaos that inspired the development of this. This is an innovative system of randomly patterned carpet tiles. Now, prior to the invention of this, if I was at your house, I spilled my wine, it stained the carpet, what would happen is, first you would kick me out and defriend me on Facebook, right? But then you would at some point have to rip up all the carpet and toss that in a landfill. With this solution, inspired by the randomness of the forest floor, you just take one square and you replace that. And it's this kind of thinking, this biomimicry thinking, that has actually helped to shape an entire industry, the carpet industry, and how they now think about sustainability. Back in the Louisiana bayous, we also had lotus plants, which are cool to look at, but they're also cool because they are self-cleaning. We talk about looking at things to think small. This is a microtopography under electron microscope of the surface texture of a lotus leaf. And basically what it does is it makes it really, really difficult for dirt and debris to hang on to it. And so much so that drops of rainwater or dew can roll off that and clean it up. So we now have innovative paint technologies that allow us to have self-cleaning buildings. Back in the South, we had termites, same as you have here in Southern California, or we have, and they like to chew up trees, they chew up buildings, and chew up houses. If you're in Southern Africa, you would see they build houses a lot like this, and about the size of a human being. These, in turn, have inspired new innovative ways for us to heat and cool buildings, which was used in this building, the Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe. Quick disclaimer, small type, fine print. I'm not a biologist, but I am somebody who just loves to figure out how things work and how they might work better. So I spent a lot of time here, and here, trying to think of all the clever ideas that I need to. It could be a tagline or a product idea or a whole business model. And when those ideas are really flowing, this is my second favorite place on the planet. But when they're not, and that happens pretty often, I think a lot of you probably feel my pain, right? Staring at that blank screen, trying to come up with these ideas. Fortunately, my biologist friends have a solution, which is simply this: to quiet your cleverness. Now, built into that, some things come to mind. Maybe I need to humble myself in front of nature. I need to just stop my distractions and those types of things. But I've since kind of reinterpreted this to say, dude, don't try so hard. The idea is that all too often we try to overthink things and overcomplicate things and feel like we have to start with a blank sheet of paper every single time, when nature has solved so many of the challenges that we're trying so hard and so cleverly to solve. There's so many things out there to inspire, so many ideas that can inspire us how to get from A to B, A to Z, or here to there in some way that could benefit us much better than the ways we're attempting it now. Now, this context of A to B and getting from here to there was actually a perfect frame of reference when I worked with a company a few years ago that wanted the answer to this question: how would nature design a better automotive seat? Now, in that same context, and kind of playing with the words a little bit, we began to look at it this way, which is the idea that future innovations are in our rearview mirror. And what I mean by that is Mother Nature's billions of years of R&D and innovation can inspire us to better ways to solve even our greatest challenges. The best part about it all is that objects in mirror are closer than they appear. They are within us, they are all around us. All of these sources of inspiration are easily accessible. So, of course, we began with a walk in the woods near a nature center, and we began by asking, how does nature do certain things? How does it actually provide for us strategies that we can emulate? So for some examples of that, how does nature distribute force over a surface area? And how might that inspire more optimal ways to use materials? How does nature distribute force over surface area and still maintain structural integrity, as the earthworm does, crawling through really tight spaces? Maybe that can inspire us to better ways to keep us in our seats. Here's another one. How does nature react to changes in temperature and humidity? And a great example was the pine cone. So the pine cone, when it's cold and wet, remains closed. It takes up water, and it fills itself up in such a manner that it remains closed. When it gets warmer, when it gets drier, it opens up. That allows the seeds to fall at a time when it's warm enough and dry enough for those to blow around and take hold. So we thought, well, maybe there's some way that can inspire us to a seat that reacts to your body temperature, or that somehow otherwise kind of thermoregulates itself. And lastly, in these examples, we looked at how does nature actually manage sudden and extreme impact, as you might need to do when you're thinking about automotive design. Woodpeckers, a great example. A woodpecker can bang its beak up to 20 times a second on a tree and not get brain damage somehow. But one of the biologists we worked with actually noted this, which is relative to the size of their skulls, woodpeckers actually have pretty small brains, which might explain why they bang their heads on trees 12,000 times a day, actually. So on a macro scale, there's a different story of impact going on. The idea and the promise of something like this, that we might spend one day that began with a walk in the woods, that began by seeding some of this bio-inspired biomimicry thinking, could actually drive innovation within a company that operates in 34 countries, has over 97,000 employees. Its technology goes into, on average, about 15 million vehicles per year. That generates $20 billion in annual revenues. And my guess is that has some positive impact on a whole lot of people. Clever, right? This is the seat that they debuted at the LA Auto Show in 2012. Bio-inspired deep down by a walk in the woods right outside of Holland, Michigan. Now, a walk in the woods doesn't always have to be a walk in the woods, right? For a guy named Tony Brennan, he was taking a walk in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And as he was walking around, he was actually thinking about one thing, which is how might you prevent the formation and the growth of things like algae and barnacles on the hulls of ships. Now, these types of things on ships increase drag in the water, which increases fuel costs, maintenance costs in the billions of dollars. And so he's trying to think, well, how do we kind of stop that? And when he was in this environment, looking out over the water there, he saw a submarine sort of lumbering into port, and it was covered end to end with algae. And he commented to the person next to him, it really looks a lot like a big whale, doesn't it? And this sparked a line of reasoning, a line of thinking, a line of research that led to a revelation. And that revelation was that sharks actually violate a rule of the ocean, which is this. Things that move slow in the water, like whales and manatees and submarines, get fouled by other organisms. Things that move fast, like dolphins, don't. Sharks move slowly, but they do not get fouled by other organisms. And the reason for that is the structure and texture of their skin. And what you see here, these are called dermal denticles, or skin teeth. And how these are structured, how these are designed, how these are patterned on that skin is what actually inhibits the growth of organisms on the shark, keeping it clean. So what they did is they biomimicked that skin into this pattern you see here. And these are millions of these little diamond-shaped features on this pattern. And for a sense of scale here, every one of these vertical lines is 2 microns wide, which is 1/50th, 50, the width of a human hair. So this is small stuff. And it was great for thinking about how do we keep the algae and the barnacles off the ships. But in a lab setting and thinking at this very small scale, they thought, well, what else could that maybe inhibit the growth of? And so they tested it out, and they found that it actually inhibits the growth of things like E. coli and Staphylococcus, these bacteria that cause about 99,000 deaths per year. And also the big business part, they account for in excess of $30 billion of excess health care costs every year. So clearly thinking this might work in a hospital environment, they've taken it and they've put it into this thin film technology you see here and applied it to the high touch areas in hospitals like the bed rails and the door panels and those types of things to inhibit the growth of bacteria such as staph. Now, what's, I'll say, super cool about this is that it actually might help us to deal with threats like superbugs, which are the bacteria that have actually become resistant to all the variety of things, the drugs, the chemicals we throw at them, all the antimicrobials such as methicillin. And you get things like methicillin-resistant bacteria. So what they will do is they'll put this there. The bacteria simply cannot find a place to live. It dies off naturally in its generational life cycle, and it has nothing to actually become resistant to. They're now putting this on things like endotracheotomy tubes and, as importantly, iPhone cases. Now, no matter how high-tech and bio-inspired my iPhone case is, I try really, really super hard, not always successfully, to not bring it into this type of environment. Because if I did, I might miss the opportunity to learn from the trees or to learn from, let's say, the wise old owl, or on a smaller scale, things like the silkworm, which, by the way, for about 5,000 years, the silkworm was the only 3D printer on the market. And on a much, much smaller scale, there's got to be something to learn from this guy, which is the water bear, or the moss piglet. And this is a crazy beast. It's about 0.5 millimeter long. And it is the most resilient organism on the planet and also off the planet. It can survive the vacuum of space. It can withstand temperatures ranging from absolute 0 to above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It can survive radiation 1,000 times what would kill an elephant. It can also put itself into this sort of cryptobiotic sleep state for years on end, up to a decade, and be brought back to life by a drop of water. These guys have been around for 530 million years. By comparison, modern humans, about 200,000. There's got to be something we can biomimic here to our benefit. Right outside that door is Venice Beach. Right outside that door, we have 5 distinct microclimates. All these amazing places that pretty much year-round you can reconnect and be inspired by nature. You can take a break from whatever it is you're working on to the benefit of whatever it is you're working on. Right outside that door is a genuine and profound opportunity to find your woods. Wherever that is, whatever that is, however it works for you. You might discover that next big thing out there. Or you might just find something that makes you smile. Thank you.